The spring rain tapped a melancholy rhythm on the tin roof of Clarissa Stevens' small farmhouse. As she discovered the letter that would shatter her world, a hastily scrawled note from her husband of 3 years, explaining that he had left for California with Veronica Miller, the banker's daughter. The year was 1873, and in the small town of Redemption Creek, Wyoming territory, Clarissa found herself alone, abandoned, and the subject of whispered gossip. Clarissa crumpled the letter in her fist, tears streaming down her face as she sank to the wooden floor. Theodore, the man who had promised to love her until death, had left without even saying goodbye. The farm they had built together, the life they had planned, all of it meant nothing to him now. 3 years, she whispered to the empty room. 3 years of my life. At 24, Clarissa had already weathered more than her fair share of hardship. Orphaned at 16, she had worked as a seamstress until meeting Theodore, believing his promises of love and security. Now she was alone again, with a small farm she couldn't possibly manage by herself, and winter approaching in a few months. The next morning, Clarissa rose with the sun, her eyes red-rimmed but dry. She had cried enough. Theodore had taken her heart, her trust, and her savings, nearly $200 they had put aside for expanding the farm, but she refused to give him her dignity as well. Dressing in her work clothes, Clarissa headed to the barn to tend to the animals. The farm wasn't much, a few acres of land, some chickens, 2 milk cows, and a temperamental mule named Bartholomew, but it was hers now, for better or worse. As she pushed open the barn door, Clarissa froze. A man was inside, his back to her as he pitched hay into the stalls. For a wild, hopeful moment, she thought Theodore had returned, but this man was taller, broader across the shoulders, his movements more deliberate. "Who are you?" Clarissa demanded, grabbing a pitchfork from where it leaned against the wall. "What are you doing in my barn?" The stranger turned, and Clarissa found herself looking up into the most startling blue eyes she had ever seen. He raised his hands slowly, showing he meant no harm. "Name's Daniel Forrester, madam. I apologize for startling you. I stopped by looking for work, and when no one answered the door, I figured I'd make myself useful while I waited." Clarissa didn't lower the pitchfork. "I'm not hiring." Daniel nodded, his expression serious beneath the brim of his well-worn hat. "I understand. But if I may say so, madam, this is a lot of work for one person." "I manage just fine," Clarissa said, though they both knew it was a lie. Daniel glanced around the barn, noting the leaking roof, the broken stall door, the countless tasks that had gone untended as Theodore's interest in farming had waned. "No offense intended," he said carefully. "I've been passing through these parts for years, and I remember when the Stevens place was one of the finest small farms in the county." "You knew my husband?" Clarissa asked sharply. A shadow crossed Daniel's face. "We've crossed paths. I heard in town he's moved on, left yesterday, they say." Clarissa's grip tightened on the pitchfork, knuckles turning white. "My husband's business is his own," Daniel nodded. "Fair enough, I'll be on my way then." He placed the pitchfork back in its place and moved toward the door, stopping beside her. "For what it's worth, Mrs. Stevens, any man who'd leave a place like this and a woman like you behind, well, he left a jewel and took dust." The unexpected kindness in his words nearly broke through the wall Clarissa had hastily built around her heart. She stepped aside to let him pass, watching as he walked toward the road, his tall frame silhouetted against the morning sun. 3 days later, Clarissa was attempting to fix the chicken coop when she heard the sound of approaching hoofbeats. She straightened, pushing strands of auburn hair from her face as a familiar figure rode into view. Daniel Forrester tipped his hat as he dismounted. "Mrs. Stevens." "Mr. Forrester," she acknowledged, trying to hide her surprise. "What brings you back this way?" "Thought you might be able to use these," he said, pulling a small leather pouch from his saddlebag. Inside were perfectly sized nails for the chicken coop repairs. "Noticed you were running short the other day." Clarissa stared at the offering, torn between pride and practicality. "I can't accept charity, Mr. Forrester." "Not charity," he corrected. "Payment for letting me water my horse at your creek." He gestured to the sorrel gelding grazing nearby. "Best water in the territory, according to Atlas here." A reluctant smile tugged at Clarissa's lips. "Your horse has discerning taste." "Always has," Daniel agreed solemnly, though his eyes twinkled. "Mind if I lend a hand with that coop? I've got nowhere to be today." Against her better judgment, Clarissa found herself accepting his help. They worked side by side through the afternoon, repairing the chicken coop, mending a fence, and patching the barn roof. Daniel worked with quiet efficiency, speaking little but accomplishing much. As the sun began to set, Clarissa invited him to stay for supper, a simple meal of beans, cornbread, and the last of her preserved peaches. They ate on the porch, watching as the sky turned from gold to deep purple. "Been a cowboy long?" Clarissa asked, breaking the comfortable silence. Daniel considered the question. "Since I was 16, that's about 12 years now. You don't look like most of the cowboys who pass through," Clarissa observed. "How's that? You're older, calmer, not so quick to show off or make promises." Daniel smiled slightly. "Age has a way of teaching a man what matters. I've had my wild years. And now," he looked out at the darkening fields, "now I'm wondering if it might be time to stop roaming, find a place that needs me, put down some roots." Something in his voice made Clarissa look away, suddenly conscious of how alone they were, how intimate the conversation had become. "Thank you for your help today, Mr. Forrester, but I should turn in." "Morning comes early on a farm," Daniel nodded, rising to his feet. "That it does." "Thank you for supper, Mrs. Stevens." He hesitated, then added, "I'm taking on some work at the Anderson place, about 5 miles east. I'll be around for a few weeks if you need anything." Clarissa merely nodded, watching as he mounted his horse and rode away into the gathering darkness. Over the next few weeks, Daniel Forrester became a regular sight at the Stevens farm. He would appear in the late afternoons after finishing his work at the Anderson ranch, always bringing something useful, a repaired tool, seeds for the garden, or news from town. Together, they slowly brought the small farm back to life, working side by side in companionable silence or easy conversation. Clarissa learned that Daniel had been born in Missouri, had fought briefly for the Union in the closing days of the war, and had spent the years since working his way across the Western territories, never staying in one place for long. He was educated with a fondness for poetry that surprised her, and possessed a dry wit that often caught her off guard, drawing reluctant laughter from her when she least expected it. For his part, Daniel discovered that beneath Clarissa's guarded exterior was a woman of remarkable strength and intelligence. She had taught herself to read from her mother's Bible, had a gift for growing things, and possessed a stubbornness that both frustrated and impressed him. She refused to speak ill of Theodore, despite his betrayal, and worked from dawn until dusk to keep her small farm running. One evening in late June, as they sat on her porch watching fireflies dance in the gathering dusk, Daniel finally asked the question that had been on his mind for weeks. "Why do you stay, Clarissa? You could sell this place, go somewhere new, start fresh where people don't whisper behind your back." Clarissa was quiet for a long moment. "This land is mine. My husband may have left, but I won't let him take this from me too." Daniel nodded, understanding in his eyes. "You're a remarkable woman, Clarissa Stevens." She looked away, unused to compliments. "I'm just stubborn." "That too," he agreed with a smile, earning a soft laugh from her, the moment stretched between them filled with unspoken possibilities. Daniel rose reluctantly. "I should go. Early start tomorrow." Clarissa nodded, walking with him to where Atlas waited patiently. As Daniel mounted, their eyes met, and something passed between them, an acknowledgement of the growing connection neither was ready to name. "Good night, Clarissa," he said softly. "Good night, Daniel," she replied, using his first name for the first time. As July blazed into August, rumors began to circulate through Redemption Creek. The abandoned Mrs. Stevens was entertaining a cowboy at all hours, they whispered. She had moved on quickly, some said disapprovingly. Others, kinder souls who had witnessed Theodore's gradual neglect of both farm and wife, thought perhaps it was for the best. Clarissa held her head high when she went into town, ignoring the stares and whispers. Daniel was her friend, nothing more, she told herself. That he had become essential to her days, that her heart quickened at the sound of his horse approaching, that she found herself smiling more often than not in his presence, these were facts she tried not to examine too closely. One hot August afternoon, Clarissa was working in her small vegetable garden when the sound of multiple horses approaching drew her attention. She straightened, shading her eyes against the sun, and felt her blood run cold. Theodore Stevens sat atop a fine new horse, his city clothes dusty from travel but unmistakably expensive. Beside him, on a dappled mare that must have cost more than Clarissa's entire farm, sat Veronica Miller, her blonde curls arranged perfectly beneath a fashionable hat. Clarissa wiped her dirty hands on her apron, acutely aware of her worn work dress and loose hair. She had not seen her husband in nearly 4 months, and the sight of him now prosperous, untroubled, and clearly unmoved by what he had done sent a surge of anger through her that was as surprising as it was powerful. "Clarissa," Theodore greeted her, his tone casual as if he had been gone for a day rather than months. "You're looking well." "What do you want, Theodore?" Clarissa asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Theodore dismounted, helping Veronica down with exaggerated care before turning back to his wife. "We're on our way to San Francisco. Got some business dealings there that are going to make us very rich. Thought we'd stop by and discuss the farm." "The farm is mine," Clarissa said flatly. "You made that clear when you left." Theodore smiled the charming smile that had once made her heart flutter. Now it only made her stomach turn. "Actually, legally, it's still in both our names, and I found a buyer willing to pay top dollar. I'm not selling." Theodore's smile faltered. "Don't be difficult, Clarissa. This is a good offer, more than this run-down place is worth. You could start fresh somewhere else." Veronica remained silent, examining her gloved hands as if the conversation bored her. Clarissa wondered if the young woman realized yet what kind of man she had chosen, the kind who abandoned his vows without a backward glance, who would do the same to her when something better came along. "The farm is not for sale," Clarissa repeated. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do." Theodore's expression hardened. "I could force the sale, you know, legally as your husband, as the husband who abandoned his wife and stole her savings." A deep voice interrupted. "I'd be careful about invoking the law if I were you, Stevens." Daniel Forrester rode into the yard, his expression calm but his eyes hard as they fixed on Theodore. He dismounted smoothly, moving to stand beside Clarissa, Theodore's face flushed with anger. "This is a private matter, Forrester, between me and my wife. Ex-wife, I'd say, given your current situation," Daniel replied, nodding toward Veronica, who had the grace to look uncomfortable. "The law doesn't recognize ex-wife without proper divorce proceedings," Theodore snapped. "The law also doesn't look kindly on men who steal their wives' savings before running off with other women," Daniel countered. "Sheriff Dunn might be interested to hear about that." Theodore paled slightly. "That's a damned lie." Clarissa stepped forward. $187, Theodore, our entire savings, gone the same day you were." A tense silence fell over the yard. Finally, Theodore turned to Veronica. "Let's go, this was a waste of time." As he moved to help Veronica back onto her horse, Daniel spoke again. "You know, Stevens, when I first heard what you'd done, I couldn't understand it. But standing here now, seeing you, it makes perfect sense." Theodore turned, eyes narrowing. "What's that supposed to mean?" Daniel shook his head, a look of genuine pity on his face. "You left a jewel and took dust. Some men can't recognize real value when they hold it in their hands." Theodore's face contorted with rage. "Keep my wife warm at night, have you? Always knew she had it in her to be a WH." The word never left his mouth. Daniel's fist connected with Theodore's jaw, sending him stumbling backward into the dirt. Veronica gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Daniel stood over Theodore, his voice low and dangerous. "Don't you ever speak about her that way again. Now get on your horse and ride out, don't come back." Theodore scrambled to his feet, his dignity in tatters. "This isn't over." "Yes," Clarissa said firmly, "it is." They watched in silence as Theodore and Veronica mounted their horses and rode away. When they were out of sight, Clarissa turned to Daniel, examining his hand where the knuckles had split against Theodore's jaw. "That was foolish," she said, taking his hand in hers. "But thank you." Daniel looked down at their joined hands, then at her face. "I should have hit him the first time I met him, years ago. Never did like the way he spoke to you, even then." Clarissa's eyes widened. "You knew us before, you never said." Daniel nodded. "Passed through about 4 years ago. Stopped at your farm for water, same as this time. Theodore was there, talking down to you about some mistake he thought you'd made with the planting. I wanted to say something then, but it wasn't my place." "And now?" Clarissa asked softly. "Is it your place now?" Daniel's gaze held hers, unwaveringly honest. "I'd like it to be if you'll have me." The confession hung in the air between them, full of promise and possibility. Clarissa looked at this man who had become so important to her, who had helped rebuild not just her farm but her belief in herself, and felt something unfurl in her heart. "I'd like that too," she whispered. Daniel's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle, a question rather than a demand, and Clarissa answered by rising on her tiptoes to deepen it, her arms sliding around his neck. When they finally parted, both breathless, Daniel rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that for months." Clarissa laughed softly. "What took you so long, Cowboy?" The weeks that followed were the happiest of Clarissa's life. Daniel moved his few possessions into the small cabin at the edge of her property, insisting on maintaining propriety despite the fact that everyone in Redemption Creek already assumed the worst. They worked side by side during the days, bringing in the summer harvest and preparing for fall, and spent their evenings on the porch, talking and planning their future together. News came from California that Theodore had indeed married Veronica Miller in a hasty ceremony, making his abandonment of Clarissa official, if no less painful. But the sting of his betrayal had faded, replaced by the growing certainty that his leaving had been the beginning of her real life, not the end of it. As autumn painted the surrounding hills in gold and crimson, Daniel asked Clarissa to marry him. They stood in the apple orchard, the trees heavy with fruit, as he dropped to one knee and offered her his mother's ring, a simple gold band with a small pearl that he had carried with him through all his years of wandering. "I don't have much to offer," he said, looking up at her with earnest blue eyes. "No fortune or fancy name, just my hands, my heart, and a promise to spend every day trying to make you happy." Tears filled Clarissa's eyes as she held out her trembling hand. "That's all I've ever wanted." They were married on a crisp October day, with the mountains standing witness and only a handful of friends in attendance. Sheriff Dunn performed the ceremony in Clarissa's garden, and Mrs. Anderson, who had taken a motherly interest in the couple, prepared a wedding feast that was talked about for months afterward. That night, as they lay tangled in each other's arms, Clarissa told Daniel about her dreams for their farm, the orchard she wanted to expand, the new breeds of chickens she wanted to try raising, the second story she envisioned adding to the house someday. Daniel listened, stroking her hair, adding his own ideas and dreams to hers until they created a shared vision of their future that seemed as real and solid as the land beneath their home. "I never thought I'd find this," he confessed in the darkness. "A place that feels like home. Someone who makes me want to stay." Clarissa pressed a kiss to his chest, right over his heart. "I never thought I'd find someone who really saw me, not just what I could do or be for them, but who I am." Winter came early that year, blanketing the farm in pristine white and confining them often to the warmth of the house. They used the time to plan, to dream, and to learn each other's bodies and hearts with a thoroughness that left them both wondering how they had ever lived without this connection. On Christmas morning, Daniel surprised Clarissa with a gift he had been working on in secret, a rocking chair, hand-carved from oak, with delicate patterns of leaves and vines flowing along the arms and back. "It's beautiful," Clarissa breathed, running her fingers over the smooth wood. "When did you find time to make this?" Daniel grinned, pleased by her reaction. "Had to have some secrets, didn't I? Besides, you'll need a comfortable place to sit soon enough." Clarissa looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" Daniel's gaze dropped to her middle, then back to her face, a question in his eyes. "You haven't noticed. You've been tired lately and sick in the mornings. I thought maybe—" Clarissa's hand flew to her stomach, her eyes widening as realization dawned. She had been so busy, so caught up in their new life together, that she hadn't registered the signs her body had been giving her. "A baby," she whispered, joy and terror mingling in her voice. "Daniel, we're going to have a baby." His answering smile was radiant as he gathered her into his arms, rocking chair momentarily forgotten. "A family," he murmured against her hair. "Our family." As winter gave way to spring, Clarissa's body changed, rounding with the new life growing within her. Daniel treated her as if she were made of spun glass, taking on more of the farm work despite her protests and insisting she rest whenever possible. "I'm pregnant, not dying," she would tell him, exasperated but secretly touched by his concern. "Humor me," he would reply, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I've waited my whole life for this. For you, for us, let me take care of you." In late July, just as the wheat was turning golden in the fields, Clarissa gave birth to a daughter they named Elizabeth Rose Forrester. She had her father's startling blue eyes and her mother's determined chin, and from her first breath, she was the center of their world. "She's perfect," Daniel whispered, holding his daughter with hands that trembled slightly, a look of wonder on his face that Clarissa knew she would remember until her dying day. "She is," Clarissa agreed, exhausted but happier than she had ever been. "Just like her father." Daniel looked up, his eyes suspiciously bright. "No, like her mother, strong, beautiful, miraculous." As Elizabeth grew, so did the farm. Daniel's steady hands and Clarissa's green thumb transformed the once neglected property into one of the most prosperous small farms in the territory. They added a second story to the house, expanded the orchard, and built a reputation for having the finest apples and chickens in the county. 3 years after Elizabeth's birth, Clarissa gave birth to twin boys, James and William, who brought both joy and chaos into their ordered world. Daniel proved to be a natural father, patient and playful, teaching the children everything from how to ride a horse to how to identify the constellations that wheeled overhead on clear Wyoming nights. On the twins' second birthday, as they watched their children chasing fireflies in the twilight, Clarissa leaned against Daniel's solid warmth and sighed contentedly. "Happy?" he asked, his arm tightening around her waist. "Completely," she replied honestly. "Sometimes I think about how different my life would be if Theodore hadn't left, if you hadn't stopped by that day, if we hadn't found each other." Daniel turned her in his arms, his expression serious. "Not a day goes by that I don't thank God for bringing me to your door. For giving me the courage to come back, for you saying yes." Clarissa raised a hand to his face, tracing the lines that years of smiling had etched around his eyes. "You were right, that day when Theodore came back." "About what?" "He left a jewel and took dust," she said softly. "But the jewel wasn't me. It was what we built together, this life, this love, something real and lasting and true." Daniel's kiss was tender, a reaffirmation of everything they had built together. "I love you, Clarissa Forrester, more today than yesterday, less than tomorrow." "And I love you, Daniel Forrester," she whispered against his lips. "Forever and always." As the years passed, Redemption Creek grew and changed around them. The railroad came, bringing new settlers and opportunities. The Stevens Forrester farm expanded, becoming known throughout the territory for its innovation and quality. Elizabeth grew into a beautiful young woman with her father's wanderlust and her mother's determination, while the twins became strapping young men who could outwork most grown men by the time they were 16. Occasionally, news would reach them of Theodore and Veronica. Their grand California dreams had failed to materialize. Theodore had lost most of Veronica's family money in bad investments, and they had moved frequently, always chasing the next opportunity, the next dream, the next chance at the fortune that continually eluded them. Clarissa felt no satisfaction in their struggles, only a distant pity for the man who had been unable to see the value of what he had, and for the woman who had learned too late the true character of the man she had chosen. In the autumn of 1899, as the century drew to a close, Daniel and Clarissa celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and the friends who had become family over the decades. That night, as they stood on the porch of the home they had built together, Daniel held Clarissa close, his silver-streaked hair catching the moonlight. "Any regrets?" he asked, his voice still strong despite the years that had passed. Clarissa looked up at him, at the face she had loved for more than half her life, and shook her head. "Not one, you," Daniel smiled, the same smile that had first won her heart all those years ago. "Just one." "What's that?" "That I didn't find you sooner," he said softly, bending to kiss her as the stars wheeled overhead, witnesses to a love that had begun with abandonment but had grown into something unbreakable, enduring, and true.